Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we're going to be taking a look at Week 5 of the NFL schedule and then jumping into my top 10 power rankings for the week. So without further ado and without wasting any more time, let's jump right into it. Starting us off on Thursday Night Football with a divisional matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Los Angeles Rams. The 49ers, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss in a game where they had 4 turnovers to the Jaguars 0. They only lost by 5 points and had every chance to put that game away. And then Brock Purdy fumbled on what could have been a game-tying/winning drive and instead ended up being a fumble, and the 49ers never got the ball back and lost that game. Now, the 49ers are very banged up. Ricky Pearsall got hurt in that game. Brock Purdy's hurt again and clearly wasn't playing at his full level of health, as he did not play very well in that game, had 2 interceptions, had a fumble. In addition to that, they also lost Jauan Jennings, also getting hurt in that game. But all of these players are possible to play on Thursday, but are very injured and are possibly not going to play, which would be a huge hit to that San Francisco 49ers offense, especially considering their defense took a huge hit by not having Nick Bosa for the rest of the season, as in the first game without him, they had no pressures, no sacks for the first time since 2015. Really poor performance on defense, really just a sloppy performance on offense, and their run game still, they have yet to get a rushing touchdown. The Rams, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Colts in a game where, yes, the Colts beat themselves, but the Rams also played unbelievably. The Colts did have 2 touchdowns called back because of Adonai Mitchell, who dropped the ball as he was running into the end zone for a touchback, and he also had a holding call on a 50-yard run by Jonathan Taylor, also called back. So while that did definitely cost the Colts, the Rams defense intercepted Daniel Jones twice, which was the first few interceptions of his career with the Colts, as well as their offense played really well. Puka Nacua had a record high for his career of 170 yards. Just all around amazing performance on offense. Matthew Stafford played really well. They had a pretty good run game, and the Rams ended up coming away with a 1 touchdown victory. While I do think this game could be played close, especially considering the 49ers offensive players are questionable and could end up playing, I think if any of those pieces miss the game, Brock Purdy was struggling without having all of his weapons because he's without George Kittle, he's without Brandon Ayuk, and now he might be without Ricky Pearsall, Jauan Jennings, and maybe even might not play himself. Mac Jones himself, the backup quarterback, is also questionable going into this game. And so I think this could be a rough one for the 49ers in a divisional matchup against a team that's arguably better than them in the first place. They are both 3-1. This game is for the division lead, but I am going to go with the Rams to win in what I think could be a close divisional matchup, but could also result in the 49ers getting blown out, especially given injuries. Moving on, we have a matchup between the Vikings and the Browns. The Vikings, they're coming off a loss in Dublin, 24-21 against the Steelers, in a game where their defense didn't play very well. Their offense played well at the end, but it was a little too late. They almost came back, but then Carson Wentz ended up throwing an interception, and that sealed the game. The Browns, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Lions in a game where they did not look good. They lost 34-10. It was not a great performance by their offense or defense. Quinshon Judkins continues to impress on offense, but Joe Flacco, I think we've seen enough. He is not the answer at quarterback. I think we knew that, but let's see some of the rookies get some game time, whether it be Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders. I think either would bring more life into this offense than Joe Flacco's giving. The Browns' defense is still pretty good, but they went up against a really dominant Lions offense and just folded. They didn't let up a ton of yards, which is a continued theme for them, but this is the second time they've let up a ton of points, as they also let up 40 to the Ravens in Week 2. The Browns do have a really good defense, and I do think that they will have a bounce back on defense, as the Vikings have had their own struggles on offense. The Browns have had a really good defensive performance throughout the year for the most part, and I do think that that defense will bounce back, especially if J.J. McCarthy plays for the Vikings. I do think the Vikings are still a better team. They have a more well-rounded team, but I really do think this game could come down to the run games, as Jordan Mason and Quinshon Judkins have really taken over those offenses as their passing games have really struggled. So I do think this game will come down to whichever defense and run game ends up being better. And I do give the credit to the Browns in those aspects. I do think Quinshon Judkins is really good, and I do think their defense is better than the Vikings. So I am going to go with the Browns to get an upset win here. Moving on, we have a matchup between the Giants and the Saints. The Giants, they're coming off their first win of the season over the Chargers, 21-18, in a game where, unfortunately, Malik Neighbors was lost to the season for an ACL injury, but Jackson Dart got his first win in his first ever start. So there is some things to be hopeful about as a Giants fan. Cam Scadaboo continues to impress. Their defense played pretty well and it intercepted Justin Herbert multiple times. All around, pretty impressive performance by that Giants team to come by at an 0-3 record and beat a 3-0 team. The Saints, on the other hand, they were really in that game against the Bills that they ended up losing 19-31 at the end. The Saints are not a good team, but they are competitive in most of the games that they play, as Spencer Rattler is not horrendous. He's not great, but he's not horrendous, and that offense is looking okay at best, but it's able to keep up with some teams, especially those with poorer defenses. Their defense is also pretty good, as they were able to stop Josh Allen quite a bit in that game. That being said, it was not enough to come away with the win, and they did end up folding towards the end of the game. I do think the Giants are a better team than the Saints. However, I do think that because the Saints defensively have been performing relatively well, and Jackson Dart's only in his second start, I do think there will be some rough parts to Jackson Dart's game in this matchup. I do still think the Giants could very well win, and I think their run game is better, and I think their defense is better. However, I do think the Saints will put up a fight, especially considering they still are winless and are looking for that first win and are going to be fighting hard for it. That being said, I could see this going either way, but I am going to still pick the Giants to win in what I think could totally be a Saints upset, but I'm going to go with the safe pick and pick the Giants. Up next, we have a matchup between the Raiders and the Colts. The Raiders, they're coming off a loss 25-24 to the Bears in a game where they had their what could have been game-winning field goal blocked by the Bears to win the game. And overall, Ashton Jeanty had his first breakout performance, played unreal in that game, over 100 rushing yards, had 3 touchdowns, including 2 receiving. Just an all-around dominant performance by Jeanty. But the real problem is how Geno Smith is playing. He threw another 3 interceptions in that game. They had 4 turnovers. All-around terrible game by Geno Smith. He continues to really struggle against not even that great of defenses. The Bears have had their own struggles on defense, and Geno Smith looked terrible against them. The Colts, on the other hand, they're coming off a game in which they beat themselves. Adonai Mitchell, as I said, had those 2 touchdowns reverted. And other than that, they were playing really good football. Daniel Jones did throw a couple interceptions, and that did end up costing them the game. But they were in that game against a very good Rams team the whole time. And I do think that this game should go to the Colts, as I do think they're a very good team and should easily be able to take down a Raiders team that's not so good. Up next, we have a matchup between the Texans and the Ravens. The Texans, they're coming off their first win of the season, 26-0 over the division rival Titans, in a game where C.J. Stroud finally looked good. Their offensive line still has struggles and will throughout the whole season, as their offensive line is probably the worst in the entire league. But their offense did finally perform. They had a good run game. Woody Marks looked really good, the rookie. And they had a really good pass game as well, as C.J. Stroud looked pretty good as well in that game. Their defense also continues to really impress, as they have been one of the best, if not the best, defensive unit in the league this year, and led up 0 points in that game. Really great performance by that Texans defense. The Ravens, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss in a game against the Chiefs, where they lost that game 20-37, in a game where Lamar Jackson exited towards the end with a hamstring injury. It's yet to be seen how that will affect him in the upcoming weeks, especially this upcoming week. And I do think that will affect his play if he plays, and I do think that there's also a chance he doesn't play. For those reasons, and especially considering the Ravens' defense is not very good, they're missing one of their best defensive lineman pieces for the rest of the season. They may not be able to take advantage of the poor offensive line of the Texans. And so I do think the Texans offensively will be able to actually have some success, and their defense will be too much for Lamar, who's hurt, or a backup quarterback in Cooper Rush to handle. So I am going to go with the Texans to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Titans and the Cardinals. The Titans, they're coming off a loss 0-26 where they got shut out by the Texans, their division rival. They looked putrid on offense, putrid on defense. They did have a couple really good sacks, but that could also be credited to the terrible offensive line of the Texans. The Titans' offense couldn't get anything going. Cam Ward spoke up after the game. He still hasn't won a game, and he's talking about how the offense has not looked like what he hoped it would. The Titans are not a very good team. They can be competitive, but they weren't last week at all, and that's also totally possible in any of their given games. The Cardinals, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the division rival Seahawks 23-20 on Thursday Night Football in a game where they really did come back towards the end. Marvin Harrison really struggled at the beginning, had 2 plays that led to Kyler Murray interceptions, one where he stopped running his route and one where he bobbled a ball into the defender's hands, both of which were interceptions. They were down big in the fourth quarter, scored 2 touchdowns to tie up the game, and then all their kicker needed to do was not kick it short or far out of the kicking zone. And the ball did not land in the landing zone. It landed short, giving the Seahawks the ball at the 40. They only needed 25 yards to get in field goal range and win the game. The Cardinals are really good at choking. They really know how to throw games. They almost threw away the game against the Panthers a few weeks ago. They did throw away the game against the 49ers, and now they threw away their chance at coming back against the Seahawks, or at least sending it to overtime. I do still think the Cardinals are a better team than the Titans, but I think this is the example of a perfect trap game for the Cardinals to fall into. The Titans' defense is very opportunistic, and the Cardinals' offense has really had its own struggles. Yes, Marvin Harrison Jr. did rebound in that game, but their run game hasn't looked the same without James Conner. Trey McBride is looking pretty good, but he's really the only consistent weapon they have on offense, and Kyler Murray is playing really inconsistently. So I actually do have the Titans' defense coming away with this victory here, as I think they are too much for the Cardinals to handle, and the Cardinals fall to a trap game against the 0-4 Titans. Up next, we have a matchup between the Buccaneers and Seahawks. The Buccaneers, they're coming off a loss to the Eagles, 31-25, in a game where Baker Mayfield had his chance for his 4th game-winning drive and did end up throwing an interception. They played really well through the second half. They were down big and really almost came back in that game. Their defense really shut down the Eagles in the second half, as the Eagles didn't do anything in the second half on offense. But it still wasn't enough for the Buccaneers to win, as they dug themselves too deep of a hole to come back from. The Seahawks, on the other hand, they won on a game-winning field goal against their division rival Cardinals on Thursday Night Football, and they look like a complete team. Their defense looks really dominant, although it really did let up in big moments towards the end of that game. And their offense looks like it really can perform. Sam Darnold finally having a good game. Jackson Smith-Njigba continues to impress, and that run game is getting back on track. I do think this game could go in either direction, as both of these teams are very good. However, I think the Buccaneers, especially led by Baker Mayfield, are a better team. They're getting players back from injury. Emeka Egbuka looks unbelievable. Chris Godwin's coming back from injury, as he played last week, but in a limited role, and will continue to reemerge. And I do think that the Buccaneers' offense should be able to be too much for that Seahawks defense, despite both units being very good. And I do think that the Buccaneers' defense will be able to shut Sam Darnold down to enough of an extent that they come away with a victory. Moving on, we have a matchup between the Washington Commanders and the Los Angeles Chargers. The Commanders, they're coming off a loss 34-27 against the Falcons in a game where they did not have Jaden Daniels, and they still held into that game. They played pretty well at points on offense, and they really did struggle on defense, though. Michael Penix had a horrible game the week before against the division rival Panthers, who don't have a good defense, and they shut Michael Penix and the Falcons down. And they responded by putting up 34 on the Washington defense. The Washington cornerback room really has been struggling, and even without Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels, they should have been able to put up more points than the Falcons, who had yet to win a game under Michael Penix in which their opponent scored over 7 points. Well, that happened for the first time here, and that was bound to happen eventually. But the Commanders do have some flaws on defense, And Jaden Daniels will be coming back for this game, but he will be a little banged up, and it's yet to be seen how he will play through that. The Chargers, on the other hand, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss, 18-21 to the New York Giants, in a game where it was Jackson Dart's first start. The defense was not efficient enough at stopping the Giants, who had been struggling all year, especially considering it was Jackson Dart's first start. And their offense was not enough either, as Justin Herbert turned the ball over multiple times, and they just couldn't get a lot going outside of Quentin Johnston. I do still think the Chargers are a very good team, and I think their offense will be more than the Commanders will be able to handle on defense, as the Commanders' defense has its problems. And so I do think the Chargers will have their bounce-back game and win this one, but I do think the Commanders will make it close, especially considering Jaden Daniels and possibly Terry McLaurin will be back for this game. Moving on, we have a matchup between the Patriots and the Bills. The Bills, they're coming off a win, 19-31 over the Saints, in a game where it was close for a while. It was probably nerve-wracking for Bills fans, but Josh Allen does Josh Allen things and comes away with a victory, getting multiple touchdowns yet again, 45th game with a passing and rushing touchdown, tying Cam Newton's record in far fewer games, and just all around great performance by the Bills in that second half to come away with the victory. Their offense looks really good. Khalil Shakir had a great touchdown. James Cook continues to really impress, and that offense is really clicking. And that defense did end up picking up the pace in the second half. The Patriots, on the other hand, they had a dominant win over the Panthers, 42-13, in a game where their special teams continues to be one of the most impressive units in the league. They have multiple punt return touchdowns. They're playing really well on those returns, and their offense is being advantageous of their field position that they're having, given how well their special teams has been playing, and they're scoring points off of most of those possessions. I do think the Patriots will make this a close game. I don't think they're nearly on the same level as the Bills, but especially considering that the Patriots are a developmental team and our divisional rival, and Drake May's been playing well, and the defense has been playing pretty well, and especially given the special teams has been playing as well as they have, I do think the Patriots will be advantageous yet again and will keep this game close in what I do still predict as a Bills victory. Up next, we have a matchup between the Chiefs and the Jaguars. The Chiefs, they're coming off a dominant win over the Ravens, 37-20, in a game where Mahomes had 4 passing touchdowns. Their offense looked like everything it used to be. Xavier Worthy really helped in that return. Tyquan Thornton continues to play really well. They've actually played a little bit better in the run game, although they still have a huge desperation in that run game, as Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt are just not cutting it. But the passing offense made up for it, and their defense was able to shut Lamar Jackson and the Ravens down, which had yet to be done this season, as the Ravens had been scoring tons of points against every team and only put up 13 while Lamar was in. Up until a garbage time touchdown right at the end of the game, they were at 13 points against the Chiefs and lost big. The Chiefs' defense played really well. Their offense played really well. They had a really well-rounded performance. The only thing they need to improve on is their run game and consistency. The Jaguars, on the other hand, they're coming off a win in which they forced 4 turnovers against the San Francisco 49ers. It was the fourth straight game in which they have 3+ turnovers. Just unbelievable defense that they've been playing all season. They seem to be one of the best defensive units in the league, one of the most opportunistic, as they take away the ball quite a lot and come away with points on offense. Even though their offense has struggled a lot, it's advantageous just as they need to be on towards their defense, as every time the defense comes away with a takeaway, their offense seems to be able to put the pieces together to score at least 3. They've been playing really well. They seem like a well-rounded team. They just need to improve on offense, which has seemed to be the story of Trevor Lawrence's career. He has a lot more potential than he's lived up to, and that offense has a lot more potential than it's lived up to. They have a lot of good pieces. Travis Hunter really started to emerge on offense there. Brian Thomas Jr. looked a lot better. Travis Etienne continues to really impress this season, and I think because of how well-rounded they are as a team, I do think the Jaguars should be able to come away with a close but yet a victory over the Chiefs, as I think they have a much better run game. I think their defense is more opportunistic, and therefore I think they come away with a victory. Even though their pass game is worse than the Chiefs has been, I think they're more well-rounded, so they win. Up next, we have a matchup between the Cowboys and the Jets. The Cowboys, they're coming off a very impressive showing against the Green Bay Packers in a game where they tied 40-40, the highest scoring tie of all time in the Super Bowl era, second highest of all time. But the Cowboys' offense looked really efficient. Dak Prescott played incredibly well. George Pickens really stepped up in the absence of CeeDee Lamb. And that run game behind Javonte Williams actually looked really good. Their tight end room with Jake Ferguson and a few other guys has looked really good. They just really, really don't have a defense. They don't have a defensive coordinator, as Matt Eberflus has been really poor for that secondary. They don't really seem to have many defensive pieces outside of a few stars, and it seems like that defense is a liability week after week. The Jets, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Dolphins on Monday Night Football in a game that they lost 27-21. Yes, they did have a touchdown called back for an OPI call on Garrett Wilson that really should not have been called, and that could have changed the outcome of the game. However, the Jets did not play well in that game. They kept beating themselves up with penalties. Their offense was inefficient and really only worked on broken down plays where Justin Fields is running for 50-yard touchdowns like he did last night. And realistically, the Jets are inconsistent. They can keep up with teams. They've been putting up a good fight week after week, except for the Bills in week 2. But they just can't put the pieces together and can't come away with wins. And because of that, I am going to go with the Cowboys to win this game. I do think the Cowboys are able to come away with a victory. They know how to win, and Aaron Glenn has still not won a game as a Jets head coach. So I am going to continue that streak and have the Cowboys win. Up next, we have a matchup between the Dolphins and the Panthers. The Dolphins are coming off a 27-21 win over their division rival Jets on Monday Night Football in a game where they really actually got their offense going. Their defense had some struggles, as it has all season, but they did force a couple fumbles. They played pretty well in that regard, especially towards the beginning of the game when they stopped a goal line carry from Braylon Allen and forced a fumble. That really ended up changing the course of the game, and then the Dolphins never really looked back and had the lead the rest of the night. They were playing really well on offense. Darren Waller's return really seemed to help that red zone offense as he scored 2 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill was playing great until he ended up dislocating his knee and tearing multiple ligaments in his knee. He is out for season, unfortunately. So Jalen Waddle, Darren Waller, Malik Washington, and their running backs of Ali Gordon and Devon Achane all really need to step up in the place of Tyreek Hill, who is now not going to be playing the rest of the season. The Panthers, on the other hand, they're coming off a devastating loss in a game where they lost badly to the Patriots, 42-13. Their special teams is abysmal. They have very bad problems on special teams that really have not been talked about enough. They are able to punt, but their return unit, the unit that's supposed to take down the punt returner, can't work efficiently. They have let up multiple punt return touchdowns. It's really bad. They're also just setting up other teams with good field position, and then they're capitalizing on that. And not to mention, they did not score with Bryce Young in at quarterback after their first drive. They scored a touchdown and never scored again with Bryce Young. Very bad game by the Panthers right after an amazing game against the division rival Falcons where they shut them out 30-0. I don't understand what this team is. They're not good, but they're not as bad as they performed last week, or at least they have potential to be better than that. The Dolphins are still a better team, though, than the Panthers, and that's really hard to say because the Dolphins have looked terrible through most of the year. However, they've had brighter spots than the Panthers more consistently, as even though the Panthers' high of 30-0 win over a division rival is better than the Dolphins' high of a win over their division rival in the Jets, I do think the Dolphins have been more consistent throughout the season, and I am going to pick the Dolphins to beat the Panthers. Moving on, we have a matchup between the Broncos and the Eagles. The Broncos are coming off a dominant win over the Cincinnati Bengals, 28-3 on Monday Night Football, in a game where they looked amazing on defense. Granted, they're playing a backup quarterback in Jake Browning. They looked really way better on offense, but they're also playing a poor Bengals defense. So it's really hard to say how this game would have gone if they were playing a legitimate team, as the Bengals don't have an offense or defense currently without Joe Burrow. And so I do want to say that Bo Nix looked better and that offense and Cortland Sutton looked better. But it's been improvements week after week, which is reassuring. However, it was against a bad defense, so it's yet to be seen what they'll do against a better defense, if this was really them finding their groove, or if they're going to return back to what they've been the past few weeks. The Eagles, on the other hand, they can't play an entire game. They can play one amazing half of football and have to rely on that half to carry them through the game. Last week, it was an awful first half and then an amazing second half comeback against the Rams. This week, they had an amazing first half that gave them such a lead over the Bucs that they did end up winning, but they had 0 passing yards in the second half. Jalen Hurts played really poorly in the second half, and they just could not get anything going. Saquon Barkley has also not been very efficient this year. He did have a touchdown out of a tush-push formation, which was really cool to see, but other than that, he has not been that good this year. He's been getting... other teams have been defending the box and stacking the box to prevent him from running, which is giving more opportunity to the passing game that they're not taking advantage of. The Eagles are still a really good team. They're just not as complete as they should be. They can't play a complete game. And so I do think the Eagles will be able to take down the Broncos, but I really wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos are on their A game if they end up winning this game, as the Eagles may not be able to play a complete game yet again, especially against a good Broncos defense. That being said, it's really hard to pick against the reigning Super Bowl champions who are undefeated, and I am going to go with the Eagles to play a complete game, as I think they will be able to when the game actually calls for it, but I'm not too confident in my pick here, but I am going to go with the Eagles. And finally, we have a matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals lost on Monday Night Football 3-28 to the Broncos in a game where they looked horrible. They can't get anything going on offense. 2 weeks in a row of scoring just 3 points before garbage time. Jake Browning is not the answer. They need to trade for a quarterback. Or if not, trade away your defensive piece in Trey Hendrickson, who other teams are going to want and is not helping your team this year, as you're not going to go anywhere without Joe Burrow, and he's only on a deal for the rest of this year. Get some value out of him, trade him away. I do think that the Bengals are pretty much done for the season without Joe Burrow. They're really screwed and are just not a good team. They can't do anything right. The Lions, on the other hand, played a dominant game over the Browns in a game where they won 34-10. They played really well on offense. The Browns don't really have much of an offense, so it's hard to say how the Lions' defense performed, but it continues to look pretty good and pass the eye test week after week, especially since that week 1 effort against Green Bay where they did not look good. They have been improving week after week, and that continued to show here. It's just hard to say because of how poor the Browns' offense has been throughout the season. But regardless, the Lions have looked like a complete team. They've really bounced back from that week 1 loss to the Packers and have not looked back and have just been dominating week after week. And I am going to pick the Lions to win yet again in week 5. Moving into my top 10 power rankings, coming in at number 10, I actually have a tie between the Packers and the Chiefs. The Packers sit at 2-1-1 and the Chiefs at 2-2. Both teams have had dominant performances and poor performances, as the Chiefs did not look good through the first 2 weeks, and the Packers have not looked good through the second half of the 4 weeks. That being said, they've also both had 2 dominant weeks of football that have resulted in wins. And I think that is enough to get them into the top 10. It's just yet to be seen how consistent these teams can be. They both have potential on offense. They both have a really good defense that has played consistently well on defense. It's just hard to say because the Packers just let up 40 against the Cowboys in their first poor defensive performance, and the Chiefs finally exploded on offense but hadn't had that offensive power all year. So it's too soon to say on either of them. I can't really put them higher, but it's also too hard to keep either of them out of the top 10 as they have shown a lot of potential. Moving on to number 9, I have the Seahawks. They look like a complete team. Sam Darnold's really been improving after week 1. He looked pretty poor against the 49ers defense, but has looked better and better every single week. That offense has really ran through Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's playing as one of the top receivers in the league right now. Their defense looks way better under their head coach over the past 2 years, and they've just looked like a more complete team. I think they can beat a lot of teams. I just don't think they are the top power, not even in the NFC West. Moving on, we have the Jaguars at number 8. The Jaguars' defense looks unreal. Their offense is inconsistent but has the potential, as they have weapons in Travis Etienne, Brian Thomas Jr., and Travis Hunter, as Etienne has played really well this season. The other two really need to find their footing at receiver, and Trevor Lawrence needs to find his footing at quarterback, as he's looked okay but not great. Their defense, however, has been incredibly opportunistic. They have over at least three takeaways in all 4 games. They're up to 13 on the year. They only had 9 all of last year through 17 games, and they have 13 through 4 games now. They have been playing unreal on defense. They're leading the league in takeaways, and I just think that defense is going to carry them far. Moving on to number 7, I've got the Chargers. Yes, they choked to the Giants. Yes, they didn't look very good on offense. But Quentin Johnston is legit. He looks like a wide receiver 1. He's looked really well, really good. And Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen and now Omarion Hampton, who had a breakout game against the Giants, all look like good complementary pieces for Justin Herbert to use. Justin Herbert did have his worst game of the season against the Giants, and that is where the concern comes from, is if he can't play consistently, if he's turning the ball over, the Chargers really don't have a ton of hope, as Justin Herbert is the lead of that offense. Their defense continues to play really well. Definitely had some struggles against the Giants, as Jackson Dart should not have had as much success as he did in his first career NFL game. However, he did not look exceptional, and realistically, nobody on the Giants looked exceptional. So the Chargers defense continues to stifle opposing offenses. It's just a question of, can it be enough to get the win? And I think when their offense is performing, yes, it normally is. But when their offense can't fire, and Justin Herbert isn't playing at his A game, I don't know if this defense is enough to carry the whole team. Moving on to number 6, I've got the Colts. They look like a very well-rounded team. They have a great pass game, although Adonai Mitchell did drop and fumble the ball out the back of the end zone instead of a touchdown, but he had a really good catch before that. And Michael Pittman and Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, they've got depth at receiver. They have Tyler Warren at tight end. They have Jonathan Taylor, the best running back in the league this year. As their running back, he's looked unreal. He had a 50-yard touchdown called back in that game due to an Adonai Mitchell holding call. However, he has looked unreal. He's broken off a ton of big runs this year and is leading the league in rushing yards for a reason. He continues to dominate. And Daniel Jones is playing relatively mistake-free football, and the defense is playing complementary football and getting them the ball back and forcing enough stops. The only concerns I have are the mistakes. Adonai Mitchell made a few mistakes in that game. The defense let up a late score to Tutu Atwell, who just torched the entire defense and ran away with it for a game-winning touchdown. Things like that cannot happen, but if they can metal down the mistakes that they're making, I really do think this team can go really far. Moving on to number 5, I've got the Rams. They look like a complete team. Puka Nacua is the best receiver in the league this year. Matthew Stafford's playing out of his mind. Devontae Adams is probably the best secondary receiver in the entire league. They just don't have a lot of depth behind him, as Tutu Atwell did have one really big catch, but has not really been seen outside of that this year. And they don't really have many other receiving weapons. Kyron Williams continues to play well, especially considering having Blake Corum right behind him, who is a good backup. Their defense also has looked really good at times. They just also are susceptible to big plays, and therefore I cannot put them any higher because their defense is not quite elite, but their defensive line is. Moving on, we've got the Buccaneers at number 4. They look like a complete team. They are able to come back from deficits. Baker Mayfield has proven that week in and week out, as he had 3 game-winning drives through the first 3 weeks and nearly had one in week 4 after being down by nearly 30 points to the Eagles. They were able to nearly come back in that game and had the chance to. The Buccaneers really can beat anyone. It's just a question of will they? And as they're getting healthier, when Mike Evans comes back, as Chris Godwin just came back, Emeka Egbuka looks unbelievable. Their defense is getting healthier, and they also got Tristan Wirfs back, and that really helped the run game. Bucky Irving continues to play amazing, and this team is just really well-rounded, and I really think that the Buccaneers deserve to be in at number 4. At number 3, I have the Eagles. They are undefeated, and I know there's only 2 undefeated teams. However, I do have them at 3 because I don't think they are very good at completing games. They can't play an entire football game well. They can play one half well. They played really complete football through the first 2 weeks and were winning games. However, they weren't really passing very much. They proved that wrong in week 3 when through the first half they were playing really poorly in the passing game and then bounced back in the second half and Jalen Hurts looked great. Well, We had the opposite just happen, as the first half looked great, and then the second half, they had 0 passing yards. A.J. Brown is also getting frustrated with his lack of use. There are problems with this offense, and they are not playing complete games, but they have the talent there. They're 4-0. They're the defending Super Bowl champions. They're going to figure it out. I really do think so. So for that reason, they're in at number 3. And number 2, I've got the Lions. They've been playing really complete football, dominant football since week 1, as they got destroyed by the Packers in week 1 and have not looked back, destroyed the Bears, destroyed the Ravens in a game where, yes, they didn't destroy them by the score, but they were dominant throughout most of that game. And then they destroyed the Browns, who have a really good defense. This Lions offense seems like it cannot be stopped, even with the loss of Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator from the past few years. And with the loss of defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, they still have a lot of defensive power, as they had 7 sacks against the Ravens on Monday Night Football last week. They continue to really show that week 1 may have just been a fluke. They may have not been ready. They may have not been prepared to not have those coordinators, and then they got accustomed to it after playing a game without them and have really just rebounded. So that's why they're in at 2. Finally, in at 1, I've got the Bills. They are undefeated. They're playing complete games. Yes, they played a few teams close, but they've won in different ways. They came back against the Ravens by 15 points. They were leading most of that game against the Saints. And yes, the Saints aren't an amazing team, but they hold in on games, and the Bills pulled away towards the end. They had a dominant win over the Jets, and they had a game that was really close against the Dolphins. They've won in 4 different ways through 4 different weeks, and it's been really impressive to see. Their offense is really good. Their defense definitely has some question marks, but it's playing well enough to get the win, and that's what you need. They just need to figure out how to improve their defense as the season continues, because that defense may not hold up long term. But the Bills look like the most complete team based on their play on the field, so I'm putting the Bills at number 1. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on my socials on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to tune in next week or whenever I decide to upload next, as I am trying to post as many weeks of the NFL season as I can, and I really hope you guys are enjoying. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And with that, I'll see you next time. Peace.